Welcome, John. I'm so excited to have you on the show. You've had such an impressive career journey from Ernst & Young to JP Morgan, and now you're leading security and risk at Wistic. And I just can't wait to dive into your experience and, your experience from both the buy side and the sell side of enterprise security assessments. So really looking forward to this conversation. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. No, it's pretty interesting coming from all angles. So excited to kind of see how we can distill this into some interesting, actionable kind of things with that perspective in mind. So excited to get started.
Well, what motivated you in the first place to transition away from JP Morgan to being on the vendor side?
It was like huge organization. Really, that is where I, was able to kind of learn and grow and build and experiment all things third-party risk and assurance. I kind of learned how to, manage a team and a budget, like all of that great stuff. And then you learn some of the pitfalls of operating in a large organization, but being kind of tied to risk and InfoSec for a highly regulated company like Chase and financial services, you get a little paranoid, right? So yeah, I've had enough of this looking over my shoulder and just hard charging and driving with kind of risk always in mind. So decided to kind of take all that experience and kind of say, hey, where can I take this and apply it? Like the industry practical hands-on stuff. And that's kind of what led me to Wistic. Had a little stop in there in between, but more on the commercial side where the focus is we got to grow, we got to sell, we got to add value, we got to understand customers and build and get creative. So it was like I didn't have to throw all that away, but just a whole new lens on that aspect of security and risk. And here that is, sometimes you forget. You get into a large organization, it's like, yeah, you're in IT or risk or security. It's like, oh, wait a second. There's people out there selling something. Like, I don't make any money for the company. I support a frontline business that's selling something. And it's kind of crazy that a lot of organizations, the bigger they get, you kind of forget.
It's so big that you have your own little world and yeah,
different angle, a little more commercially focused, but still still taking that security risk lens, but much more of a business focused kind of commercial drive behind it.
One of the things you mentioned to me earlier is just when we look at how security professionals evaluate content, like most of them, like 76% of them don't trust the marketing content from vendors. How does that affect your approach for Wistic?
As a buyer, right? So I was on the other side. It's a kind of bring an interesting, unique perspective that, in previous roles, I was on the assurance side. So where Chase, JP Morgan Chase would be trying to engage a vendor and buy a service or a product or a piece of software. And I was the toll gate to make sure it was safe and secure. So we were bottlenecks there, even more so if you have less of a buy-in and alignment with like the actual business, right? So there's some struggle there, but now as like on the, I work for a security company. I do security and risk for Wistic, but we're also kind of play in that space too around security and due diligence. Like we enable that whole process. That's what Wistic does. I do the security for that. So I'm a buyer of technology, software. It's just wild how we get hit up as a buyer, right? New services. And it's very, I had an interesting experience actually just this week where one of our competitors is just really impersonal in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of technical buyers, if we're in InfoSec or like CISOs, are a really good example is that they're just kind of desensitized to the marketing. Not that it's like deceptive or, not true. It's just like, I have better sources that I'm going to rely on and trust more than a company website or like an AE that reaches out to me cold kind of a thing. So I think there's just like the pendulum is kind of swinging. It's just like, stop. It's just noise. In a lot of cases, it's just noise. And if I have an interest in something, it's let me reach out to my network, my peers, industry groups. Like, what's the skinny on, this latest SaaS that's supposedly solving everything. Let's get the real story kind of a vibe. And that's kind of what I see amongst peers as well.
When channels get saturated and people, they get enough people, BDRs call you, it stops feeling like it starts being less effective. I know that in cyber, we've got so many decision makers involved in making these, infrastructure level decisions about what vendors to use. How do you navigate that level of complexity in sales? Personally, the more buyers, the more people there are involved, it's just so much harder to understand how the decision's being made and what's actually happening when you're on the outside of that company. I'm curious how you handle it.
It's actually a great question. And my first, being kind of a practitioner, hands-on, like coming from the third-party risk space and sitting in a seat doing that job for, 5, 6, 7 years, and then going to work for a company that sells software into that space, you just bring a level of empathy and understanding to the sales process. What I preach kind of within Wistic is leverage other folks within the company to support that conversation, that sales cycle, right? So our buyers, our prospects get a real feel in a sense that hey, we're not just experts on our product. We actually understand, we get we feel your pain kind of a thing. And it's not to say we got all of our salespeople have to be, experts, someone coming from that space. That's not what I'm saying. It's just, they just have to be comfortable kind of talking shop and, nerding out, as they say, a little bit just goes a long way. I just see how prospects respond to that. And even just a little bit just goes a long, long way to say, yeah, obviously I know my product, but I also know your day to day, and I can marry the two, right? That builds confidence.
Yes, absolutely. You're preaching to the choir, as they say. I love this because everyone gets so excited about the latest sexy tactics, and there are some, there's always something that's outperforming, but the fundamentals of just showing empathy, understanding who you're selling to are so much more valuable because they don't change. That's always going to matter. So completely agree with you.
It's funny because I had someone, it was a really funny story. Someone once told me I'm not a salesperson, right? I came from, I was a practitioner in the third party risk space and continually kind of getting pulled into these sales, type conversations, talk with prospects and customers, kind of as they say, street cred. You bring that to the table and it just kind of opens up the conversation a little bit more. You can kind of play off of your coworkers and that, in some of those steps. Plus it's a lot of fun, right? So just a change of pace and a shift of gears from the everyday security risk compliance stuff.
I know that for a lot of more complex products like Wistic and companies, SaaS, that they're doing more complex products, there's always a solutions component, and business strategy wise, there's always a kind of a trade-off between how much revenue from services solutions makes sense because some people need that extra help, that they have harder challenges, but also it's not exactly SaaS revenue. How do you handle that issue at Wistic?
Yeah, that's a great question. We ran into this, I'd say a couple of years ago as we were kind of ramping up, and as a practitioner, I identified that need and said, hey, we get a lot of prospects and customers that come to us and I know, I joke with the sales team, the pitch is easy, everyone gets it. But it's how do I plug this in? I know I need third-party risk. I know I need a solution. You look check all the boxes, but I don't know where to start. We kind of, in some cases, you could be setting your customer up to fail if you just kind of hand the software over to them, a good foundation to build on, right? They don't have the right requirements. They may need some just a little nudge to kind of design and build that foundation to where you can, configure and implement much more clearly and not leave some of the guessing to them. Because we will see the worst case scenario is, you make the sale, they hop in there, they have no program, they're just starting out, kind of flailing around, and, they end up maybe blaming the wrong people or blaming the software. And it's no, we missed a step, right? So I'm really big on that part of it. Yeah, the struggle is, it's not considered revenue, but if you have professional services that is not a massive outlay of resources, there's creative ways to kind of supplement. And in some cases, you can kind of fold that into like your customer success and implementation. I kind of mentioned that earlier, like let's get dangerous with knowing the business process and maybe acting more of like a professional services arm, a little more than, the traditional kind of CSM.
And just to your point earlier, you also can't just drop them off in a super complex or they may not be experts in the problem like you are. So customers usually need some extra something to get them over to first value.
It always depends. Customers know exactly what they need and they're like, get out of my way, leave me alone. Perfect. Great. Happy to do that. But we're talking about the other camp, which is, hey, let's, we have some things some help to kind of get you started. So we do offer that. It's important.
And we talked a little earlier about just how people are evaluating and learning about technical products like yours, like Wistic, into the security space. How's Wistic generally going about getting new customers, net new eyeballs, net new people to understand what you guys offer, given like all this problems that we all know about right now around saturation?
Yeah, a lot of different ways. That I mentioned number one is just find our happy customers that are getting a ton of value out of Wistic, and get them talking with them, sharing kind of that traditional kind of, obviously we're traditional marketing aspects, myself as just practitioners and thought leaders within the space, right? We won't just sell something into the third-party risk space, but we have practitioners and thought leaders that participate in the industry, right? I sit on a steering committee for shared assessments, Cloud Security Alliance, involved in those types of initiatives. So I think that is also important to show we're not just here with our solution, but we're helping to elevate, we're collaborating, working with peers in the industry, thought leadership, and just kind of contributing and participating in the community, like the third-party risk community, as they say. I'd say that's where I would lend my expertise or resources to the kind of the marketing side of the business.
Can you tell me how CMMC and the upcoming regulations, how Wistic helps with CMMC, with companies looking to deal with that regulation?
We can tackle like a standard or a new regulation essentially from both sides, right? From a buyer and a seller side. So if you're looking to sell into like the government space that's going to require a CMMC, you don't want to wait around until someone asks you for it. You better get going on that, right? So solutions to essentially self-assess and kind of demonstrate proactively how you already comply, or, where you may have some deficiencies or gaps, and share that proactively with your customers, or in some cases publicly in like a trust center, right? So that's a type of kind of vendor solution that we offer. So this, completing the standard, all the supporting documentation that kind of surround that standard and making that readily available to prospects potentially looking at you. That's a great signal. Like, hey, I've already thought ahead, rather than
everything. Your I's are dotted.
Exactly. Like you're waiting, you're ready and waiting for that. So we have a suite of standards, obviously includes the CMMC in there, that vendors can kind of prepare and get ready to sell into that space. And then on the flip side, as a buyer, right, similar solution in that you can essentially request that particular standard, or even better, if that vendor already has made it available within the platform, or we call it a trust catalog, or data exchange, that's essentially ready to be pulled off the shelf, right? As a buyer, okay, here's a vendor I'm interested in. Let me take a look at their trust center, their profile. Great. I have the CMMC standard completed. Here's all the supporting documentation. Wow, that's happy path, right? That's like best case scenarios. Like there's not much to do. It's already there. You just kind of consume it. If not, the traditional ways of, hey, vendor, we're looking to do business. So you got to get CMMC and interact and engage with that vendor and kind of complete the assessment in the Wistic platform in a more automated fashion, the help of AI to essentially allow the solution to kind of do the digging and the dirty work. So you can kind of get greedy with all of the data that surrounds the CMMC certification, and then run an assessment on really any framework against that amount of data. And that's kind of the real value of Wistic, is to kind of distill a large amount of data and get kind of actionable like compliance results on a particular vendor for particular controls, right?
Where do you see, just in general, vendor security assessment space? Like, where do you see it heading in 2025?
Yeah, obviously AI, is huge. It's going to continue to move left. right? Like before, a few years ago, all of the solutions, we were just offered a way to kind of request a better mousetrap. Like, yeah, I'm requesting information and I still have to manually review it, right? Now we have AI that's kind of automating a lot of, reading of a large amount of data and corresponding it to controls and spitting out a report. Now we're continuing to move even further left and take a look at maybe more proactive actions that could be taken based on things that change.
Like reacting to what we're learning about the compliance space in general.
Not less of a point in time, like, hey, let me take a look at all this documentation and run an assessment. Okay, looks great. We consider that like a point in time and starting to move towards more continuous monitoring. So as things change or more data comes into that vendor record, I'm alerted. I can see as things are updating real time, especially as data sources are greatly increasing and kind of being funneled into these solutions. It all comes down to kind of what is that experience like for the end user? How do we organize and distill and make sense of all of this information to the point where it's not just a bunch of noise and I don't know what I'm, what you're looking at.
Making it actionable. Well, this has been fantastic, John. And before we wrap up, I would love to know what excites you the most about Wistic's role in the compliance and security space in the future.
I think really what we talked about, kind of the highlight was being able to speed up the sales cycle, which is really what this is all about, right? So not having security teams and TPRM teams be a bottleneck to closing a deal or buying purchasing and engaging a vendor, but truly being a partner to the business and enabling that business to get through due diligence faster, but more efficiently, right? It's not about cutting corners, but really adding value to those TPRM teams, which is going to hit the bottom line, for the businesses they support. So that's kind of how we win, is just adding value to those programs, which in turn adds value to those businesses they support.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, everyone loves it when you can do what you wanted to do faster, when the security is like, yes, we're confident, it's done. Well, thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, it's been great, John Michelle. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.